Morning, everyone. I'm happy to stand here today, and I guess maybe I'll start with answering the question of how do you go from physical chemistry to data science? Well, the way I think about it, when as a scientist, a lot of what we were doing is thinking about hypotheses and trying to make decisions. In the scientific world, I was looking at chemicals, now I'm looking at people. So in my mind, it's kind of a natural segue. What I'd love to do is I've got about 45 minutes today. I want to talk a little bit about what I call lessons on driving data science and analytics transformations. Because many people probably know the stories of companies like Amazon or Stitch Fix, which are driving their entire business model through data. But they were actually born with that in their DNA. They actually were founded with that as part of who they are. When you think about a company like The Gap, as Jeff was mentioning, we're a 50-year-old company next year. And how do you actually take those enterprise companies who've been around for a long time and begin to infuse a data-driven approach into the way that the company operates? And that's something which is not easy, but it's actually something which today I'd like to share a few lessons along the way of that we've had at both at Gap, but also places, stories from others that I get inspiration from as well. So as Jeff mentioned, I lead customer data analytics at Gap. We are a central team within the company, and we're actually helping support all the brands and functions like digital marketing or credit card program to begin to use analytics around the customer to drive that customer centricity that Jeff mentioned as part of the digital transformation earlier today. But this all starts with this idea of big data. And I always like to think of this as probably the biggest buzzword that I've seen in the last 10 years. It used to be called data mining years ago. And even before that, it was kind of statistical analysis. And when I think about what does it mean to me, it can mean everything from lots of data, as Jeff mentioned from the volume talking about earlier, to different types of data, like the one coming from my Apple Watch that I checked right before I got on stage and told me my pulse was much higher than normal. To actually quite different types of data from other sources as well. And when we talk about this velocity, if you will, and I love Jeff's slides as well, but I actually like to contextualize it for me. If I think about how much has been generated just in the time since I've been up here on stage, data in the world, it's been enough to fill the hard drives of everyone's computer who's in this room about 10,000 times. And that's just a massive amount of data. But I think on the flip side, the opportunity though is that less than 1% of this is actually ever analyzed. People don't actually use it. And so I always think about bridging that gap, and many people see, no pun intended, bridging that gap as a huge opportunity that the company can really embrace. So how does a company tackle this? Well, typically, people sit in a room, particularly big companies like mine, and say, we should bring in machine learning and AI, and that will solve all of our problems in the world. I'm sure no one's heard that before in this room, right? Actually, it's probably an oversimplistic way to solve this. Now, you may have heard, and Jeff mentioned this, is this magical unicorn called the data scientist coming in the last 10 years or so to help solve all of world hunger and all your company's problems. And while this term dates back to the 1960s, which is actually interesting, it wasn't until about 2008 when Tom Davenport wrote an article called The Sexiest Job of the 21st Century as the Data Scientist in Harvard Business Review. And in here, he actually highlighted examples from companies like LinkedIn and Facebook where he actually shared some of these success stories about these data scientists. And how I like to maybe, I'd say, simplify it a bit when I think about a data scientist and how they can drive digital transformation, is I think of them as equal parts hacker, stats geek, and entrepreneur. You put those together, put them into a business environment, and allow them to go to town at solving problems. But they can't really do that by themselves. Now, I want to demystify just one more bit about this idea of a data scientist, just so you can understand my kind of perspective on this. This is an article called Analyzing Analyzers. Fascinating name, isn't it? It's an article about data scientists by data scientists. And in it, they begin to describe 4 different classes of data scientists, everything from the data developer, the person who's building products at companies like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, where they're really more heavily engineering focused. A data researcher, which is someone who you may find is solving complex understanding of what drives situations and how things react to each other. A data creative, someone who you may find at the New York Times creating those amazing interactive articles. And then the last person, and this is the one I like to think of myself more of, which is a data business person, where that entrepreneur piece comes out. And so when you think of the ways, though, now you have this massive amount of data, you've got these, new type of data worker in the world called the data scientist. What are some of the problems one could address with this? Now, I won't bore you with this slide, but I will show it to you for 20 seconds. Because this is typically how someone would think about breaking apart the application of analytics to drive a business. We have on one axis time dimensions, another kind of information insight and questions that are pretty simplistic around what happened, all the way to the very complex is what's the best or worst thing that can happen. Now, I think of this as actually good, but it's a little complex for me. And I like to simplify, I think, the two big applications of how to use data science analytics to drive a company really breaks down into two pretty simplistic ideas. The first is how do we actually use analytics to make better decisions? So this is a lot about measurement, analysis, experimentation. And the second part, and this is, I think, what's probably core to most of the folks in this room, is how do you actually power product experiences using data and analytics, which is you design and you build with this. I'd say those are two ends of the spectrum. And I'm going to talk about the journey we're taking at Gap to go from the left to the right-hand side of this journey. So, I've spent about 5 minutes giving you theory. This is one of my favorite quotes from Thomas Edison. So you're saying, now, Chris, you've given some theory. Tell us how to do this. So I'm going to share 5 quick lessons that I've learned along the way of how to begin to infuse this way of thinking into larger companies. The first comes from inspiration from a company that we all love and sometimes love to hate, Amazon. And actually, this is a story about how Amazon has actually driven their company. And I'd say what I get from this story is really that this belief of how to be a customer-centristic, a data-driven organization comes from the CEO and the executive team. You have to have that buy-in from the top. Now, the challenge is, and many folks in this room have probably faced this themselves, is you'll have someone come in and say, we need to be data-centric, as this is our mandate, this is what the board says. But if you don't actually have the entire organization able to embrace that themselves, you don't really make as much progress as you can. And so a second piece of this part of the story that I actually get a lot of inspiration from is from a company called Airbnb. Many folks know of Airbnb in this room, I'm sure. Maybe have actually used them. But one of the things, and I heard this from Elena, who is one of the leaders of data science at Airbnb, one of the things that I get inspiration from is they've actually begun to democratize data, not just through access tools, like giving people, bringing together data in a single layer, having access permissions and the tools to query things, but more importantly, how do we create education so that everyone in the organization is kind of required to be part of your job to actually know how to interact and work with data. And then building a whole enterprise of what I call data products that actually allow people in the context of the work that they do to be more successful. So it isn't just about giving someone, Excel spreadsheets, they go for it. It's actually thinking about how they actually do their day-to-day job. And so I'd say the first kind of lesson on the journey, if you will, about transforming companies with data science really start at the top, but you really have to build from the masses. You have to have the entire organization along in the journey and actually giving them the tools to do so. Okay, so now we've got the first lesson. We've got the executive support, you've got kind of the team ready to go. What do we do next? How do we actually take our next step? And this is typically where we faced ourselves at Gap when I started about 2 years ago, as well as probably many in this room of, how do we actually bring those tools to life? What are the technologies we need to give to our teams to be successful? And oftentimes, when you're at this junction, you're faced with the decision of, do I actually want to build something myself, or do we want to buy it, or more importantly, partner with third parties to accelerate our progress? And as Gap, historically, we were on the build side. In fact, many people don't know this, but we actually built our own e-commerce platform many, many years ago, and it's actually quite advanced at the time it was, and we're still pushing it forward. And it's something that was in the core of our DNA as a company. For the last couple of years, we spent a lot of time working with partners like Telium and others to build an analytics stack, as well as a technology stack, more broadly speaking, to help accelerate progress. And so an example, this is just the requisite logo slide of ones we're using, and you'll see right in the middle is Telium. We've really begun to, I'd say, leverage these partners to accelerate progress, to do things that historically we couldn't do ourselves. So I want to talk a little bit about one of the things that we're building that is near and dear to my heart, which is what we're calling Customer 360. So at a high level, I'd say what we're trying to do, and everyone here is probably trying to do the same thing, is know our customers better than they know themselves. If we can do that and actually feed that not just to people to make decisions, but to our personalization platforms, we believe we can actually create a very differentiated experience to our customers that they'll love and they'll want to keep coming back, buying from us over and over again. And thank you, Jeff, for visiting Banana Republic. We'll hope to see you again soon. But in this journey, historically, like I said, the way we would have done this, and the way we historically have done this to the company is we had someone write a PL SQL script. Anyone in here know that? Yeah, a few people. That's about 15 years old. And that is how we would take data from all these places, and maybe once a week or once every couple days, we'd run this script, and we'd say, here's our customer. And then we'd transfer that file to many systems. Then oftentimes they would fail because we weren't necessarily focused on performance. And that was our customer knowledge engine. Over the last couple of years, we've put massive strides in place to leveraging third parties to drive this new way of thinking. One of the key partners, as we mentioned, was Telium. And what Telium has really helped us do is serve as the hub to not just to do the tag management and actually gathering information in the data layer, but with our the audience stream product is actually making sure that that information gets out to all of the different properties in real time so that we can actually personalize those experiences in our websites as well as in our marketing channels and vehicles. And so I shared that as an example of one of the ways we're working forward. But we have a whole list of partners we're working with. And for those who'd like to learn more, I'm happy to chat later. But I said I would not put the tech stack up here because literally it changes every single day. Because our approach is we want to find the best in breed and really assemble our data platform to serve the best in need today for us and evolve it over time. And so I'd say the second key lesson then in this journey is instead of trying to do things all yourself, is to leverage partners along the way. So we start with kind of the executive belief. We have folks who know how to use analytics in the company. Next, we build our data platforms with partners like Telium and so forth. Then the question is, what do we do? How do we actually solve business problems with this? So I'm going to share a little bit about some of the journey we went on from a customer analytics perspective at Gap that hopefully will bring to life our philosophy and approach. The first thing that we did, and this was actually something super basic that we did a couple years ago, or about a year and a half when I first started, was begin to understand what drives engagement in our customer base. As Jeff mentioned, Gap Inc. has 4 major brands. We're launching Hill City. I think today is when it finally goes live. And one of the things that we found, not surprisingly, is that the more that folks engage with us across channels and brands, the more valuable they are in the long term with us. Seems pretty basic, but for the first time, we actually have the data and the analytics to be able to prove that out. I think what's most interesting about this is when you get people to the right-hand side of this, which is they've visited multiple times, they've shopped in multiple brands, in multiple channels, their value to us in the near term is about 10 times, but in the long-term value for them is about 15 to 20 times higher than folks on the left-hand side. As a company, when we begin to frame this out, if we just move 1% of people from the left to the right, that could equal $350 million in top-line sales revenue for us improvement. On a $16 billion company, that is a massive opportunity for us. And so when we first presented this analytic to the executive team and to actually a lot of the marketing teams of the company, they're like, oh my gosh, now we have something we can go after. Because when I started, we were very much a product-focused company. We were very much how many jeans did we sell today, what was the margin on those, what was the sell-through of ... But we didn't think about customer. And so we began to introduce that into our lexicon. So then the question is, once we have them in this right-hand side of the world, and oh, by the way, about 10% of our customers are already there, what do we actually do with them? So what we said was, well, let's not try to boil the ocean. Let's start with something super basic. And the first thing we did was on the left-hand side. We said, what if we just move some people from they buy once from us to get them to buy a second time? It seems pretty simplistic in its idea, but we didn't really have what traditionally we call life cycle campaigns built out for us. This is where we started to begin to analyze the customer base a little more deeper. And we began thinking about their product journeys as they interact with us. What was their first purchase with us? Women's denim. What was kind of the next logical purchase in their progression? We began to build out these journeys, if you will, on how customers are naturally buying products from us and what are the paths they take. Now, one could say, well, you could get machine learning and AI techniques, and they could do that for you. And I would say, yes, we could. But to get this started took about a week worth of effort, as opposed to spending all of the time integrating with new partners. when we're not even sure quite yet what the right path is. And so this gave us a bed of information on which to begin to experiment on. So I want to talk about some of the experiments we did, and these were ones, again, that were powered through Telium as well as our other partners. The first is we began to test on the Gap brand new homepage combinations, which brought to life these product journeys. And these are just 3 examples. But I really want to highlight the progress that the teams collectively have done at Gap on this personalization journey, specifically for the Gap brand. Now, I like to call this out before I come into this. This is a combination of folks in our technology teams, folks in our data analytics teams. We have a digital performance and growth team, folks in our brands to create content. This has been a massive undertaking. We try to start super simple because that's how we at the company can actually make progress. So when we started the year, if you were to visit our Gap brand website, there was one experience that you would get, one homepage, which that worked well for us, and we did messaging experimentation. We did some personalization and product recommendations later, but in terms of the homepage experience, it was basically one experience. Leveraging Telium, we actually began to start this year in the journey where we started pretty simple, where in January we went to 4 segments, and we saw a massive improvement in revenue per visit. And then just a couple months later, we actually went to 27 segments. And then now, today, we're at about 87 segments. I think the power that this is brought to us is the idea that we can rapidly begin to build data, segments, and information about our customers to power personalization. Historically, this is one of the bottlenecks, has been the data side of things, to be able to actually power the experiences. For us now, it's not. It's more about what's the strategy, what is the content, how do we create those segments, like what does the journey need to look like, how do we build experimentation into it to see which segments are working, which are not. That is now the challenge for us, is to operationalize that. Whereas if you'd asked us about a year and a half ago, it most likely would have been the technical the technical ability to deliver this. So I'd say the third lesson in this journey, if you will, hopefully you saw what this is. When you're beginning this journey, keep it simple, particularly at the beginning. Oftentimes I will tell people I will not start with the technology first. Start with the business problem and what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to drive first. And then you can move and add complexity where needed. Okay, so now we've got the executive team bought in, we've got technology up and running, we've got some proof points going, the business is excited about how we can continue to drive the business through data. What's the next step? Oh my gosh, the scaling. How do we actually support an entire enterprise? And we have 160,000 people in our company. While a lot of them are associates, sales associates, we still have a large number of people across all of our brands who want to be inspired and powered by this. So I'll just share with you how we're approaching it at Gap, is through an organizational structure which combines on the right-hand side of this more centralized teams. So these are teams that are building our data science models, kind of the heavy stats and machine learning capabilities. We have our technology partners in our team, I call it informatics and governance, or data ops, which is really focused on building our platforms with Gap Tech. But what we've seen the success is particularly on the left-hand side of this chart. Remember I mentioned this idea of having entrepreneurs to drive value? That's actually been one of our biggest challenges in the organization, is we can build all these things and people don't quite know what to do with them. I remember my first 2 weeks, and this hopefully no one in this room will repeat it back, but we're all friends here, right? Within the first 2 weeks, I met with one of our marketing leaders in the company and began to talk about things like retention rates and acquisition challenges, all those, kind of life cycle-based metrics. And she said to me, "This is fascinating, but I have no clue what to do with this." And to me, that was a really big insight, where if we want to actually help drive the value to the business, we actually have to be in the trenches with the teams, helping them solve problems day in, day out. And so I'd say one of our biggest learnings and opportunities has been on the left-hand side of this chart, where we are beginning to embed analytics experts in different business groups, in functions, to help them leverage how to use this to drive value. So these will be people historically who come from the question always comes is, what's their background? People from management consulting backgrounds tend to work really well in this space. People who may have been in the quantitative side of things, but really enjoy solving business problems. People who, quite frankly, have that entrepreneurial aspect to them as well. And so this is how we're beginning to frame out and scale the the organization at Gap is built around these pillars. And I wouldn't say we're all the way there. We, quite frankly, the way I've described this, we're earning our right to grow this function. But it's something that I've seen both at my company and also other companies like LinkedIn and others use the same sort of model as well. So that's I'd say my fourth kind of lesson, which is embed a data entrepreneur to drive value. So I'm going to move on to my last lesson, and this is one where I'd say is a little more aspirational for us. If you remember at the beginning, I talked about the two things one could use data science or analytics for. One, to make better decisions. The second, to power product experiences. I want to actually talk about that one. And there's two examples I'm going to share, which give me a little bit of inspiration about how we want to try to do this at Gap, but also hopefully maybe in your own companies you can think about that as well. The first comes from a company called Progressive Insurance. Is there anyone here who works for Progressive? Yes, I can tell the story, and if I don't get it quite right, I'm okay. So Progressive Insurance, this was something I tried a few years ago, came up with a product called Snapshot. For those who don't know, most people who don't live who live in California may not have heard about this product. But Snapshot is a product which basically is trying to solve the pain point for customers of, well, why are you giving me a rate for my insurance that's based on the people who live around me, or people who have the same type of car that I drive, or people who may work in the same place that I work? Because I drive better than them, because everyone always drives better than everyone else, right? So why don't you give me a personalized discount? That was kind of one of their inspirations. And they actually, the way I've heard the story told, actually one of the biggest drivers of churn was that people felt like they weren't getting treated fairly and they'd go somewhere else for a cheaper rate, right? Because they feel like, oh, well, I can get it cheaper somewhere else. So they created this product called Snapshot, which is a little device, plugs into the underside of your diagnostic port in your car, which I didn't know existed until I tried this. And what it does is it monitors your driving patterns every day. And at night, and I know this because I took a hammer to it to see what was inside of it, it uploads your driving patterns through a cellular connection to the cloud and allows Progressive to analyze your driving patterns and create a personalized rate just for you. So this sounds kind of creepy, but it actually was pretty exciting when I tried this. So for those who don't know, there was a point in time I lived in Texas, but I worked here. And so I was commuting. And I tried this in Texas because you can get it there. And you'll see at the beginning, I started to get a pretty good rate of 7% off. But when I left and came back here, my current spouse was the one driving my car. And what I could actually find was that, once you can see the little blip there at the end, this is the point where I started to go back to California. So now I can say, wait a second, I have proof now that maybe you need to improve your driving patterns. And what was even better about that was I could actually diagnose through their interface what it was that was the opportunity, which was heartbreaking, and allowed me to actually get better at driving, and also my current spouse get better at driving as well. And so this may sound kind of funny to talk about the story, but I think what inspires me about this was the fact that they actually created a brand new experience that was personalized for me, that actually solved a pain point for me that made me feel really good. They actually integrated a web experience with the kind of a physical experience, which that's another hallmark of something I think that's quite interesting in the journey. But I think more importantly was the impact it's had on their business. So we had the opportunity to hear someone talk about this product at a conference, and while they couldn't tell me the exact numbers, they said that churn significantly decreased for the customers for which this product was targeted, which is primarily millennials. And the one piece they did share was that the Net Promoter Score for this, which is kind of a measurement of the love metric, how much you love this product or service, was about 20 to 30 points higher for people who had this versus people who didn't. And for those who don't know, that's like the difference between like a Ritz-Carlton experience and maybe like a Motel 6. And so it is pretty meaningful, and it was for their business. So that's the first story, just to give people a little bit of ideas of how to power product experiences through data. Now, the second story actually comes from my hometown, as Jeff mentioned, Orlando, Florida. One of the things that I've loved about Orlando, just because I was actually born and raised there, was the fact that Disney World was born and raised there. In fact, my mom was employee number 40 at Disney. And so I'm going to actually start this story with a video instead of the kind of the punchline. One thing I'll tell you just to set up the context of the video before we show it. This is a video where it's a mom has given her daughter a backpack, if you will, and has Disney princesses on the front. And the mom hands it to her and says, "Go ahead and open it up, Lily. Let's take a look at what's in the bag." And Lily pulls the bag open. She pulls out a T-shirt that has Minnie Mouse on it. And she says, "Oh, it's a monster." "No, it's Minnie Mouse." And she's excited. She pulls out coloring books. She pulls out, towards the end, things like snacks, things like, maybe we're going to be taking a visit somewhere. And so that's the point. That's at the point where I'm going to start the videos, just about the end where she's unpacked her bag, and you get to see her reaction to what's happening to her.
Where do you think we should take all this stuff?
Leave it here.
Where do you want to go with it? If you could go anywhere, where would you want to go? Why don't we go?
Okay, let's go.
Now. Today.
Okay.
I'm being serious.
We going?
We're leaving today to go to Disneyland.
Are you joking?
No, I'm not joking.
Are we done?
Yes, we're going. Are you excited? It's for your birthday! Happy birthday!
It's my birthday today.
No, in a week, but we're going. I'm crying too! I'm crying too! You excited? Give Daddy hugs!
Are you gonna want to tell about it?
We're going when Daddy gets home from work. When Daddy gets home from work. Do a happy dance! Yeah! I love you!
I love you too.
Okay, bye! Okay, bye!
Oh, okay. Yes, we'll clap for Lily. Okay, so you're probably wondering, why is Chris making me cry at the first thing in the morning? Well, because I want to make people cry, but more importantly, to me, this brings to life actually a really interesting point with regards to data. Now, I'll come around to this. You saw how happy Lily was, that emotion that she generated with Disney World? Going back to what I said is, I think the many times I've been to Disney, that experience, that excitement, the hype, doesn't quite live up to the reality when you get there. And many people probably know that who've been there with family and kids. And part of that has to do with the fact that Disney's recognized it's very difficult to create those personalized connections and experiences to people that make Lily feel excited when she's waiting in line for 4 hours to see Snow White. So Disney has invested in over $2 billion in creating technology in their theme parks under the guise of something called My Magic Band or My Magic Plus, which, as I've seen and I've used it, it starts off with doing pretty functional things where you wear a band around your wrist, and you can do things like check into your hotel room, pay for things, get your fast pass in the line. But really what they've started to do is begin to integrate that technology into other parts of the overall experience. So as an example of this is there's, in connection with some of their, this is hot off the presses, some brand new augmented reality technology that leverages this, where you can actually interact with Tinkerbell in the line for Peter Pan. And in fact, people are saying, I want to wait in line because I want to experience the brand new way of interacting with their product experiences. And they've even have things like Easter eggs buried in the product experience they have, where you can leverage and unlock this with the My Magic Plus technology. And I like to think about it as kind of a capstone to what could be a pretty amazing experience. Because imagine when Lily, as you saw, was able to come to, on her birthday, to Disneyland, and Snow White comes up to her and says, "Happy birthday, Lily." Imagine that emotion that she will have, and that connection she has that's powered through data. And so the last lesson of the story is, begin to power new product experiences with data. Pretty simple to say, pretty difficult to do. So in wrap-up, in summary, these are just a few lessons I've learned along the way, both for myself, but also ones I've learned from others, about how to begin that journey, as I said, to integrate a data-driven approach, a digital approach, into more enterprise-based companies. Because as I said, if you're not born within your DNA, it can be very difficult to bring this to life. So hopefully you're able to today learn from others here today about how they're doing these things. I'm happy to share lessons too. I'm here all day today and tomorrow and would love to compare notes. This is a learning community. We all want to grow and build from each other. So I just wanted to end with that. And with that, I will say thank you very much.